first thing, but quite quickly it'll warm up. The sun will get to work. And it's looking much sunnier for northern and eastern England, for much of eastern Scotland compared to Tuesday. It's still going to feel on the cool side, particularly on the east coast with the breeze coming from the North Sea. But I think with a lighter wind and with more sunshine, it's going to feel pleasant enough. 15 or 16 in the south, 8 to 9 on the east coast of Scotland and eastern England. Now into Wednesday nights, more lengthy clear spells and lighter winds again. So I think a more widespread frost, still in places like Cardiff, London, Southampton, 6 or 7 degrees. But in sheltered spots, away from urban centres, those temperatures getting close to, if not below freezing. So a frost on Thursday morning, but another dry and bright start to the day, another fine day for the vast majority. Just some rain drifting past the Northern Isles there. Otherwise, for much of the country, it's sunny spells, some cloud floating by. And for Friday, a bit more cloud in the sky, but Saturday the sunshine returns, particularly in the southern half of the UK.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hey, happy Tuesday to you and yours. If you're watching in Tanzania, happy Union Day, commemorating the union of Tanganyika and Zanzibar. We don't celebrate that on the Mark Steyn Show because I'm in favour of the restoration of the old Sultanate of Zanzibar. Did you know Freddie Mercury's dad was the cashier at the Zanzibar High Court? That's tonight's fascinating fact, and there'll be a quiz later. But we do have other things to get to. Coming up, what's happening to UK children? It's unusual and it's spreading. Also, is everyone who matters working for China? And when will Her Majesty's government butch up and recover Her Majesty's sovereignty? Plus, your thoughts live and in real time, so do send them along by email to gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can tweet me at gbnews. Love to hear from any Zanzibaris, maybe even the rightful Sultan, who last I heard was living in Portsmouth. All that coming up after the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Good evening. The top story tonight: a man arrested on suspicion of the kidnap of Katie Kenyon has today been further arrested on suspicion of her murder. Lancashire police say although Katie has not yet been found, they're now working on the basis that she is no longer alive. The 33-year-old woman from Burnley hasn't been seen since last Friday morning. A senior government source says the Prime Minister has threatened to privatise the Passport Office unless it clears the backlog of applications. Boris Johnson is said to be horrified that families wanting to go on summer holidays are now under pressure to pay up to £100 extra to fast-track their applications because of delays. He also criticised the body for not preparing for post-COVID travel. The Foreign Secretary Liz Truss says it's important not to be distracted by Russia's nuclear weapons threats and that she's determined to work with allies to rebuild Ukraine. Meanwhile, the United States has welcomed Germany's decision to send heavy weapons to Ukraine for the first time. Speaking from an airbase in Germany, US Defence Secretary said NATO leaders will now meet monthly to intensify support for Ukraine.
I applaud all the countries that have risen and are rising to meet this demand. But we don't have any time to waste. The briefings today laid out clearly why the coming weeks will be so crucial for Ukraine. So we've got to move at the speed of war.
President Putin has agreed in principle to let the UN and the Red Cross be involved in the evacuation of civilians from the Azovstal plant in Ukraine's Mariupol. The United Nations released a statement after the Russian president met with the UN Secretary-General, General Antonio Guterres, in Moscow. Downing Street has stressed the need for Twitter to remain responsible and protect users from harm. That comes as the platform's founder welcomes a £34.5 billion takeover of the company by the world's richest man, Elon Musk. The Tesla boss says he wants Twitter to be a platform for free speech. Political economist Dr. Stephen McCabe has questioned, though, whether buying Twitter was a good business move for Mr. Musk.
Buying a company that, apart from 2 years, 2019 and 18, the year before, has never made a profit. In fact, in 2020, for the where the latest accounts are available, made a $1.1 billion loss. So to buy sort of a company such as this and spending it, what's a large amount, $44 billion, is somewhat strange. What's in it for him?
And tennis player Novak Djokovic will be able to defend his title at Wimbledon this year. It comes after the All England club confirmed players won't need to have had a COVID vaccine to compete. The coronavirus restrictions has only enabled the world number one to play 3 tournaments so far this year. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+, you're with GB News. Time now for Mark Steyn.
On yesterday's show, the statistician Jamie Jenkins was here to take issue with some comments I'd made about the efficacy of the COVID vaccine's so-called booster. We had a very civilised disagreement, so civilised that Mr. Jenkins posted it on his YouTube channel, after which YouTube immediately removed it on the grounds of misinformation. Perhaps for his next trick, Elon Musk could buy YouTube. As I complained on the show that originally caught Mr. Jenkins' eye, thanks to our awful groupthink media, we live increasingly in a world in which there is only the official version on the one hand and on the other disinformation. So your freedom of speech is the freedom to be a pet shop parrot, and everything else the woke-talitarians of social media will take down. We need a much wider range of public discourse. Our present arrangement, in which there is only the official narrative and disinformation, would be laughable were it not for the fact that its consequences are tragic. On GB News, we don't do the groupthink. The entire Western world, except Sweden, has lived under a weird experiment these last 2 years. And that experiment has had consequences. A couple of weeks back, I referenced the Ofsted report on the damage done to our children by the years of lockdown and isolation. This is mostly in terms of stunted educational and social development. I'm slightly amazed at how little coverage that Ofsted report got in the media, even though Ofsted is Ofsted, so it's all super official. Many years ago on Broadway, I saw a Sam Shepard play about a dysfunctional family that's got a dead baby buried in the backyard, but everyone's agreed not to talk about it. The Western world's getting a bit like that. The damage done to our kids doesn't matter, because we've agreed not to talk about it. And indeed, the control freaks of social media won't let you talk about it. We now have, in addition to the Ofsted report, a bizarre and terribly serious physical ailment that's emerged in a dozen developed nations. Child hepatitis at about 4 times the usual rate. Very unusual. It's in Western Europe, America, Israel, but the epicenter is the UK. We account for about 2/3 of all cases reported to the World Health Organization. In fact, England alone accounts for about half of all cases worldwide. But it's spread from England to Wales to Scotland to Northern Ireland, and in compliance with the Northern Ireland Protocol, crossed the border effortlessly and headed south. Here's the Daily Mail's map of where it currently is worldwide. Take a look at that. America, Belgium, Spain, Israel. What do these countries have in common? Well, some of the toughest COVID regimes of the last 2 years. And as the Telegraph says, deadly outbreak of children's hepatitis linked to lockdown. Infants may not have been exposed to viruses because of restrictions during pandemic, says UK health chief. 1 child is dead, and 10 UK children have had to have liver transplants, which is an awful thing to have to undergo at that age. We don't know why this is happening, and there is as yet no official version of events, so we are free for the moment to talk about it. As a matter of fact, we asked someone from the HSA to come on the show, because if you're going to have a government bureau called the Health Security Agency, this would seem to be a matter of health security. But they demurred. However, we do have Ros Jones, who's a retired consultant paediatrician and who served on the Education and Training Committee of the Royal College of Pediatrics and Child Health, and we appreciate her joining us. Ros, this came out of the blue just a few weeks ago. What do you think lies behind this? Because whatever we're up to now in the United Kingdom, 114 is rather a lot of children with hepatitis.
Yes, absolutely, Mark. And it is worrying. I mean, I think it's particularly obviously worrying if you were the parent of one of these children, because it clearly is a serious infection with this much higher than expected risk for going on to liver transplant. But I wouldn't want the majority of parents to be hugely worried, because although the rate has gone up enormously, hepatitis in childhood is rare. So we're talking about more than rare. So it's still rare. It's just, instead of being very rare, it's just rare. So we've had 100 cases in a population of 5 million under 5s. But it still means one has to look at why. And the UK HSA's suggestion that this is about so-called immune debt, the fact that for the first 2 years of the lockdown, these young children who are very much at the beginning of their own immune career, let's say, have not been exposed to the sort of germs all around that they would have been that helps develop their own immune systems. I mean, I think there's still quite a question mark as to precisely the cause of it. The most likely contender is an adenovirus, which is a common virus. And, normally in small children, it gives them a snuffly nose, maybe a sticky eye, some glands in the neck, but it doesn't give them hepatitis. It is linked to hepatitis in adults with immune deficiency, for example, post-transplant patients, people on chemo might get this.
Right.
But for children, it's very odd for adenovirus to do that. So the worry was that maybe this is an adenovirus new variant, which is much more severe. But that doesn't seem to be the case, because if that were the case, this hepatitis would be across all age ranges. There's clearly a lot more adenovirus around at the moment than usual, about 3 or 4 times as many cases per week. But what's different is not that, but the fact that these under 5s are getting this much more severe version of it. Maybe there's a genetic link. They're looking for any other cause, such as a poison, or, obviously the worry was, could this have been vaccine related? But this is an age group that haven't been vaccinated. So it seems extremely unlikely that this is vaccine related. Or COVID related. But again, the incidence of COVID in these kids seems to be no higher than in the general population, obviously, if you test every child going into hospital, some of them will be positive. But the main linking feature seems to be this adenovirus.
Well, when you say it's not vaccine-related or COVID-related, just to go back to the point you were making earlier about people with suppressed immune systems who just recovering from a serious operation or whatever medication we're on. Until 2020, children spent the first 2, 3, 4, 5 years of life running around playgrounds with a lot of other children or being in the nursery with a lot of other kids, passing germs back and forth to each other all the time, like in a giant petri dish. And now we have done, the last 2 years, we've done something completely different to them that we haven't done in the course of human history, I don't think, which is to wall them off all on their own, cover them up. They're seeing fewer people. They're not passing germs back and forth. And as you were saying, they may well have made them vulnerable to something that you'd previously have to be a 59-year-old adult who's just had a major operation to be susceptible to.
Yes.
You're a lifelong.
And it's interesting because I work with the Health Advisory Recovery Team, HEART, and we covered this in last week's bulletin. But we looked back to what we've written in March 2021. When we did a complete review of pandemic policy. And this was one of the specific things we'd highlighted there. And there have been other publications back from June 2020 highlighting this as a potential risk. And it's been shown with some other conditions too, like there was quite a severe outbreak of RSV, which is a virus that gives bronchiolitis, respiratory infections in, again, infancy. And was much more severe in New Zealand and Australia, where they had really, again, totally closed the borders and had very, very tight draconian lockdowns. And this adenovirus, it's partly a respiratory virus, in which case, like COVID, it will have escaped masks and lockdowns and everything else, because airborne viruses aren't very well controlled by these measures. But it's also probably a gut virus, it can be passed on by the so-called fecal-oral, sorry, I don't want to go into too much gory details, but, poo's in your mouth, which is what, of course, toddlers do. They scratch bits they shouldn't, and they then poke their fingers in their mouths, etc. But all of the hand washing in schools may have had quite an impact on, reducing the amount of other gastroenteritis things. And I think that's interesting. I think it's interesting that it is the UK HSA themselves who have highlighted that this may have been due to lockdowns. This isn't lockdown skeptics saying this. This is the official channels saying, we think. This would explain why it's just this age group. Because if it was a more nasty version of adenovirus that had somehow mutated, then it would affect older children or adults. But it does seem that in the UK, certainly, virtually all the children are under 5. The average age is 3, I think. But in terms of reassuring parents, it still is rare. You'd be your child would be very unlucky to get this. And the only general advice I would give is, obviously, if your child gets jaundice, if they're yellow, do seek urgent advice. But if they're generally unwell, if they've got diarrhea and vomiting, most kids bounce back after 24 hours. But if they're just not getting better, then it will be worth asking. But what you shouldn't do is send them back to nursery until at least 48 hours, after they've finished having whatever, they've had in terms of gastro symptoms, because that's where it's otherwise going to be just spreading around nurseries.
Just let me ask you as a paediatrician then, though, if you have... and as you've said, this remains a rare disease. We're talking about 114 children out of a population of about 5 million. Although there are people who say it's obviously higher, that people just haven't put together the yellowing skin of their kid and the colour of their stools to stray into the matter you were talking about. But let me ask you this: that we've given these kids such a weird 2 years, And we've clearly done some damage in terms of just the normal build-up of your immune system. In some ways, the first couple of years, the first 2 to 5 years, are your most important years of life. If you screw that up, you spend the rest of your life trying to compensate for what you got wrong in the first 2 or 3, 4, 5 years. So do you think this suggests that there will be other emergent problems that these children with these very weird, abnormal last 2 years will eventually be on the line for?
Well, I would hope that their immune systems will catch up, but we don't know that. I mean, I think, it is as a vital time in your immune function to be learning early on how to deal with all the viruses and bacteria you're going to meet. So it is a worry. I think, it's more likely if we look statistically that the serious things which you alluded to at the beginning in that Ofsted report in terms of the psychological impact, the fact that children are reaching primary school with very poor language, their normal ability to talk and communicate, because they've been either not going out to socialise in preschool toddler groups, or if they have, they've been with adults in masks. And the idea of wearing a mask in any preschool environment was clearly, likely to be damaging. So I'd be more worried about that. But, you're right. I think there's a big question. It's been one of the things that I've been worried about reducing the age range for the COVID vaccines, because the COVID vaccines clearly do have an effect on immune function. And what you want children to do is to develop natural immunity, which will stand them in good stead long term. This, I don't know. Time will tell. And of course, they still haven't finished the investigation.
Yeah.
But I think it seems likely it's going to be an adenovirus which hasn't got worse than usual. It's just that the children are less able to deal with it than usual. And I'm sure lockdowns almost certainly will be part of that.
Well, as you say, and your stuff from whatever it is now, March 2021, so over a year ago, is well worth looking at. Because I think we can talk a lot about unforeseen consequences. But I think this is certainly something that any pediatrician would have foreseen. This is such a bizarre way to bring children into the world. And as you say, there's no reason for them to be wearing masks for the first. And then you say, oh, well, OK, you've got weakened immune system, so you're now getting the hepatitis. But we're still going to insist that you be vaccinated if your mum and dad want to take a holiday in Spain or the south of France. It's bonkers. It's sick. And until we have an answer to some of this stuff, there certainly ought to be put on hold the idea of jabbing primary school kids. Thank you very much, Ros. We appreciate your insight, and it's good to hear it from a paediatrician. Let me know what you think. GBViews at gbnews.uk. You can tweet me at GBNews. We're going to get your reaction next. Plus, is everyone working for China? Natalie Winters looks into that, and Kate Hoey's here. Everyone's favourite Ulster lass. Yes, I know a few of you would put Dana in that category, but it's a close call. We'll go with Kate Hoey. She's coming up all straight ahead.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Join us on GB News tomorrow as we report on these specialist armed ambulances being converted for transit to Ukraine, where they're currently losing 15 ambulances a day. These specialist vehicles have never been more urgently needed. Ambulances for Ukraine tomorrow on GB News.
Hey, let's get to your thoughts. Who or what is to blame for the rise in hepatitis cases in the UK? Tony says vax dodgers, anti-maskers and the British government. What about, I don't know, people who like Coldplay? Jules says Chris Whitty. That's Sir Chris Whitty. To you, Jules. He did such a grand job they gave him a knighthood, and Sir Patrick Vallance did such a grand job they gave him a double knighthood. So he's now Sir Patrick Vallance. He belongs to the exclusive Twice A Night Club, which most of us can't qualify for. Chris Whitty is responsible for every child that suffers side effects from the jabs. On his head be it, after overruling the experts. I wouldn't say that, Jules. You know, we've had rule by experts now for 2 years. And in case you haven't noticed, everything's wrecked. Everything that can be wrecked has been wrecked. The cost of living is going through the roof. Inflation is going through the roof. And now childhood hepatitis is going through the roof. Rule by experts. It'll get you every time if you're a non-expert on the receiving end of the experts. John says, we've got 3 weeks... We've got 3 weeks to flatten the hepatitis curve. Next slide, please. John says, does hepatitis also kill your granny? You know something, the median age of the COVID deaths is above the life expectancy in the UK. So in order to keep people alive who've already lived out their life expectancy, we decided to torment young children by making them wear masks, by not letting them see their friends, by not letting them run around the playground. In New York City, it's actually rather chilly at the moment, and until a few weeks ago, you had to sit outside to eat your school lunch in a mask. We've done terrible things to our children on the grounds that we don't want them to kill Granny. I actually think it, we talk about demographics a lot on this show. I'll just throw this out there. You can tell me what you think about it. As you know, the fertility rate in the United Kingdom has collapsed, as it has in many parts of Europe, to the effect that basically we're having to import vast numbers of people to be the children we couldn't be bothered having ourselves. And we'll see how that works out. But this COVID pandemic, where we've prioritized protecting the old at the cost of damaging our most vulnerable population, that is the young, the children who can't give informed consent to wearing a mask all day, who can't give informed consent to getting a booster shot or a jab that they don't need at all. So in other words, in order to keep the old alive for a few more years, we've stuck it to our kids. And in some way that sums up the demographic death spiral that the UK and Europe are in. Just a thought I'm throwing out there, just like a cheery thought before you head up the stairs to Bedfordshire, as dear old Vera Lynn used to sing. Every day, people are being accused of being on the payroll of the Russians. We had George Galloway on the show after he was labelled, quote, Russia state-affiliated media by Twitter. Yeah, look at that. Russia state-affiliated media, George Galloway. It's still up there. But take a look at this guy. This is Jim Spellman. He's an ex-CNN guy who works for CGTN. That stands for China Global Television Network, which actually is Chinese state-affiliated media. Actually, it's controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. And yet Jim Spellman, if you notice, he's completely unlabeled by Twitter. Russia can reduce certain coastal cities in Ukraine to rubble, which is tough if you happen to live there. But China wages war in subtler ways, and its tentacles reach into every corner of our lives. Natalie Winters of the National Pulse has written about this. We're always glad to see Natalie. There's a kind of express checkout from CNN that leads you straight to a cushy job with these Chinese guys, Natalie.
Well, the fact that there is a revolving door between CNN and CGTN, the premier Chinese state-run media outlet, tells you all you need to know about the editorial line of CNN. But it's not even just a problem housed at CNN, and the same goes for the New York Times and even the BBC. We also put up a story at the National Pulse tracking several former high-level BBC staffers who ended up working for China Global Television Network as well. But I think it really, really makes you wonder why the Chinese Communist Party's premier state-run outlet, again, the same outlet that pushes propaganda every single day, every word that comes out of those hosts' mouth is basically approved by Beijing. So they're not going to let any loose cannons in there. So it really makes you wonder why they would feel so comfortable hiring people from CNN, from the West, from the BBC. And it's because they know that they're not going to criticize the Chinese Communist Party. Because the evidence is the work that they've done for their former outlets. I'd even add one more name in there, an individual by the name of Jonah Kessel, who used to actually be, or is currently serving as the director of cinematography over at the New York Times, but he actually used to work for China Daily. He did their entire website redesign back in 2010. He actually used to tweet about how much he loved working for the Chinese Communist Party until we exposed his tweets. He ended up deleting all them. But there really is a concerning relationship between a lot of Western media outlets and their Chinese Communist Party counterparts.
The Chinese have done this on the sly, but you look at, say, the way stories that should get more traction but don't. For example, the protests in Hong Kong a year or two back, where at one point a third of the population of Hong Kong, over 2 million people, were on the streets, which is pretty spectacular. And yet if you switched on an American news broadcast or you looked at the New York Times or even the BBC, as you say, they didn't seem that interested in it. Do you think, in other words, everybody is adjusting consciously or unconsciously to the power realities here?
Oh, it's definitely the case. And on the Chinese Communist Party side, this is a very calculated and orchestrated effort. This is political warfare at its finest. They know that most Americans, most people in the West, unfortunately watch these outlets, although maybe not CNN Plus anymore, but watch CNN, watch, MSNBC, and take what they say as gold, right? It's high church for a lot of people and a lot of important, influential people in Washington, D.C. who make decisions. But what they don't know is that a lot of the factors that are influencing the editorial lines at these outlets, whether it be the fact that China Daily is paying for advertisements in a lot of these papers and for a lot of these TV networks, or even that a lot of these kind of Chinese foreign influence groups, those that have been flagged by various branches of the federal government as seeking explicitly to try to get Americans on the payroll of the Chinese Communist Party so they will do their bidding for them in the mainstream media. You can see these journalists taking trips to China in exchange for favorable coverage when they return. And I think that's why you don't see a lot of coverage on what's going on in Shanghai right right now. And there's a lot of ramifications when that happens, because think about it. The Chinese Communist Party got away with what they did in Hong Kong because the media didn't hold them to account. Obviously, Chinese state-run media is not going to do it. So Western media has a unique responsibility in that situation. But because they didn't do anything, the Chinese Communist Party got off scot-free. And I think that's part of the reason that you see such an emboldened China today.
It's also true, isn't it, that they got off scot-free pretty much with what was going on in Wuhan, where basically, well, for example, at Wuhan, they closed the Wuhan airport to domestic flights elsewhere in China, so you couldn't fly from Wuhan to Shanghai. But on the other hand, you could fly from Wuhan to Milan or New York or Vancouver or Berlin. And it's very strange to me that there was so little interest in that in major Western news outlets such as CNN or the New York Times. It's almost as if their priority was to create some kind of narrative that didn't disturb anybody on the Chinese Politburo.
Well, just like I think most products in the West, you know, they're made in China, I think a lot of the times the same goes for the talking points that you hear coming out of these Western media outlets. It seems that the only people that they're okay criticizing, at least in the early days of COVID-19, were people who were willing to say China virus. All you kind of saw was ad hominem attacks on people who said that as being racist. Yet in reality, they were doing softball interviews with a lot of Chinese Communist Party leaders, even people who worked at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. And remember, the fact checkers who, you know, silenced, I'm sure, a lot of people watching this show, the individuals that they were citing, that they were hailing as credible authorities and voices on the issue were researchers from the Wuhan Institute of Virology themselves. So it's really mind-boggling, and I think it shows you where their allegiances lie. It's not with the truth; it's with the Chinese Communist Party.
And added to that, we should say, is a lot of these so-called news outlets are part of big multinational entertainment conglomerates for whom making sure that Fast and Furious 37 is allowed to open in all those Chinese multiplexes is as important as any real news consideration. Thank you very much for that, Natalie. It's a fascinating piece, and I was interested to see you can't get anyone from CNN to comment on that. Oh, and if you didn't, if you're a British subject and you had no idea what Natalie was on about when she referred to CNN Plus, that's a new CNN service they launched a month ago, and it was such a disaster they canned it after a month. So people expecting GBNews to close every hour of the day. We're still here, coming up to our first year. CNN Plus lasted a month. Thank you, Natalie. The world got a bad dose of a Chinese virus, and oddly enough, it's made us all more and more like the Chinese, especially with respect to freedom of speech and freedom of movement. The groupthink governments of the West have had 2 years to monkey with everything, and as you know, I'd like a royal commission to inquire into COVID policy and its consequences. We have a couple of breaking news things. Denmark has become the first country to suspend COVID vaccinations, which I find interesting. While other countries are talking about the 4th, 5th, 6th shot, the Danish health authority says, no, that's it, we're done. And this from a little clip from the Tennessee legislature. Take a look at this. The guys in the white coats are doctors.
700,000 people in the study in Israel, just so you know, that showed that the double vax were 27 times more likely to get reinfected. So it's not, the vaccine, even if we just talk about that, is not stopping infection, it's not stopping transmission. If you look at the studies in England, in Scotland, and in northern countries in Europe where they get real data, that they're actually the triple vaccinated are the most likely to die. So bottom line is that
The triple vaccinated are the most likely to die. That's Dr. Richard Urso, MD, as in doctor. Well, Dr. David Steyn, we got docs all over the show tonight. Dr. David Steyn is a senior clinical lecturer from Exeter University College of Medicine. What do you make of Dr. Urso in Tennessee, Dr. Steyn?
Well, if you are just looking at pure numbers, actually, he's right. If you just look at the pure numbers, the very elderly, those who've got multiple comorbidities, those with heart disease, those who have previous strokes, those who've got kidney disease, for example, all of those have got a much, much higher risk of dying. Compare a 20-year-old to a 70-year-old with a heart disease and a bit of kidney disease, there is about a 50-fold increase in the risk of that the elderly person with all those multimorbidities having dying. If the vaccine just reduces that by a half, there's still a 25-fold increased risk, and it's happening, and that's what's playing out at the moment. And the problem is that the statistics that we're seeing, and I saw with great interest your conversation with the statistician talking about this, the statistics that we're getting doesn't factor in those subtleties, that whether does a 20-year-old really need 3 or 4 vaccines? Well, they definitely don't need 4. Whereas the 80-year-old who's got those multiple comorbidities definitely needs the vaccines in order to keep them safe. And I think that's the bit that those numbers that you were talking about the other night really does bring out. I don't know, can we see those numbers that we looked at from the UK HSA that you presented really nicely, because one
is that
of the key elements.
Yeah. Let's just put up. I think you're referring to the graph where I coloured in all the columns to make it a little bit easier to watch on TV. Can we put that one up? Have we got that one? Okay, we'll carry on and make a point, Doc. Oh, here it comes. Here it's coming up now. Here we go. I think this is the one. This is looking at deaths within 60 days, I believe. That's what you wanted. This is the one you wanted to talk about?
That's absolutely right, yeah. And it looks at those deaths within 60 days. And what it shows primarily is that about 95% of those, 95% of those deaths are in people over the age of 60. And only a very, very small number. So, if you look down at the bottom of those 60 plus, that actually accounts. So it's about 9% of the deaths are in the 60 plus, 20% of the deaths are in the 70 plus, and 64% of those deaths are in the 80 plus. So put them all together, you've got 95% of the deaths in that group. And that's the group, if you compare the triple vaccinated to the double vaccinated, you see that there's about a 3 to 5-fold reduction in the death rate per person who's been vaccinated in the elderly. And if you look at the youngers, well, if you only got 4 deaths or 10 deaths, actually, to do statistics on that sort of number is utter nonsense, and we shouldn't be doing that in the first place.
Well, let me ask you about that, because here's the thing. I love all this nuance talk, and we all like to be nuanced because it makes one appear terribly sophisticated. But the point is, the government is not in the least bit new. And I'm not particularly singling out Her Britannic Majesty's government, but governments all over the Western world are not being in the least bit sophisticated or nuanced. They're saying that it doesn't matter whether you're a strapping 17-year-old rugby player or a bent-over nonagenarian who's got 7 underlying comorbidities. You've all got to get the shots. And in fact, increasingly, you've got to get the shots to perform certain employment functions. You certainly need to have a whole bunch of stuff to be able to travel, just to get on a shuttle. I'm not even talking about, real foreign travel, actually, but just at one point, Ireland was closed off to any Englishmen, Scotsmen or Welshmen who weren't complying with this stuff. So we've got a one-size-fits-all government approach in which we're incentivizing medical interventions for people who don't need them.
And I do agree with a lot of what you're saying, and I think it's important to say that a lot of these decisions are made as part of a disaster management program. And if we look at when Omicron came along, There was no real clarity, even amongst the different governments within the UK, let alone across Europe, about what the right strategy was. We knew for certain that of the antibodies that you produce from your vaccine, only about half of those antibodies were going to be effective against Omicron. And the two different strategies that played out, one was the one that England adopted, which was, well, if you double the number of antibodies you've got against those Omicron, so you double the number of that 7, and yes, you will take the others with it, then you will get some protection. Whereas if you went to France, Germany, Spain, they looked at further lockdowns at that point. So we had those two different approaches. And I want to stress, this is disaster management. Nobody knew when those decisions were made what the real outcome was going to be. And as it happens, I think the call that we made to go for a triple vaccination, focusing most on the vulnerable, the elderly, and offering it to anybody else who wanted it, but really pushing on the vulnerable, was the right call. And it was so much better than the lockdowns that we saw across Europe when Omicron first hit, which turned out to have been fruitless. What France and Spain and Germany decided to do, I mean, the COVID passports are ridiculous, and I agree with you entirely on that. It doesn't stop spread, and therefore that was a false process. And I think France, Spain and Germany need to look at what we're doing now to say that a vaccination strategy and some simple measures is far better than this draconian measures that they're putting in place at the moment.
You sent me a chart an hour before the show that I looked at with great interest about how the effect. It's not. We won't put it up on the screen because I don't think it looks particularly easy to follow on TV. But it showed basically the fall off in effectiveness of the virus, which starts very quickly. I mean, even accepting your figures, it's 10 weeks. I mean, there've been some surveys done in South Africa, I think, suggesting that the ineffectiveness of these vaccines can actually start a lot sooner than that. But it basically falls off very quickly. So you're talking now about a system where if you regard vaccine coverage as indispensable, you'd be having to stick people's arms with these needles every 3 months. And that surely is going to lead to all kinds of other medical consequences that, and cumulatively weaken the immune system, as we talked about earlier.
So, firstly, the evidence that it weakens the immune system is slightly skewed by the populations that we do the studies in. If you look at a very vulnerable population who's already on the edge of their immune system, it could have an impact there. But for the vast majority of us, it wouldn't. However, I do agree with you that every 3 to 4 months isn't a long-term solution to this. But that figure shows that after 2 vaccinations, it's about 10 weeks that it stopped being effective against Omicron. Really important to remember that the vaccines were designed against the original wild-type variant, and it lost a little bit of efficacy against Alpha. Then it lost a bit more against Delta, and then when it got to Omicron, it was a massive shift that it wasn't as effective. But importantly, what they showed is the first 10 weeks after 2 jabs, you do lose efficacy. But then when you got your 3rd jab, for the majority of us, the 3rd jab lasts a lot longer. And that's why we are only giving that 4th dose to the very, very small select group. Even me as a healthcare worker seeing COVID every single day, we don't need that 4th jab yet. What we need to move to is a strategy where we can actually measure our antibody titers and say, once your antibodies drop below a certain level, that's the time to get your vaccine. And for some, that will be 3 or 4 months. For others, that might be 12, 18 months.
Well, that's a very interesting point, because the whole antibody thing has been downplayed under this vaccine regime. And I'll just leave you with one final thought. Again, I was looking at one of your graphs. They're talking about, a week after, 1 to 2 weeks after receiving your 2nd shot and everything. What's interesting to me is that on a lot of these official numbers, in the first 2 weeks after you're getting your first COVID shot, they still put you in the unvaccinated. So in other words, if you happen to die within the first 2 weeks of getting your first COVID shot, your death is recorded as unvaccinated. So there are a lot of dodgy things going on with the numbers here. And I repeat what I said to Jamie Jenkins: if you can find me some statistical basis for any efficacy at all with respect to the booster shot, I would be very interested to see it. And you're welcome back anytime to talk about that. Thank you very much, David Strain. Stump the Steyn's coming up. You can ask me anything. Oh, and Kate Hoey is here because someone at Westminster needs to talk up the union, and it's all a bit tentative from the relevant ministers. Don't touch that dial. We're coming right back.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
We're approaching the centennial of the Irish Free State this December, when Dublin became the capital of a self-governing jurisdiction and ceased to be part of the United Kingdom. A lot of things changed and a lot of things didn't change, such as a common travel area and free movement within these islands. And I don't just mean Britain and Ireland, but the Isle of Man and Guernsey and Sark and all the rest of them. So it's slightly odd to me that in an area of constant cross-traffic since, the year 563, when St Columba, Ireland's other patron saint, sailed in a wicker curragh for Kintyre to preach the gospel to the heathen Scots, somehow traffic within these islands, after all these millennia, is now something that is solely in the gift of the European Union. They saw opportunity in Brexit, and they seized it by insisting that Northern Ireland could not be permitted to secede from the EU in the way that Wales did. And their justification was to protect the Good Friday Agreement, but by protecting it, they meant perverting it, by putting a hard border between Northern Ireland and the rest of the UK straight down the Irish Sea. That border gets harder with every day. The losing side of a court case in Belfast has now been given permission to appeal their loss to the UK Supreme Court on the grounds that it raises certain issues, such as whether a bunch of continentals are allowed to revise the 1801 Act of Union, which is our present kingdom's foundational document, and states pretty plainly that, quote, His Majesty's subjects of Ireland shall have the same privileges and be on the same footing as His Majesty's subjects of Great Britain. And right now, if you're in Carrickfergus Boris or Enniskillen, you don't. Baroness Hoey is one of our few parliamentarians speaking up about this. Kate, I take it you're quite pleased by the news this is going to be heading to the Supreme Court.
Yes, it was a good decision. We would have obviously appealed separately if the High Court had not allowed it to happen. But it's better when they sent it, and also they sent it basically saying that they thought it was hugely important constitutionally for the Supreme Court to look at. And it is very important, not just for Northern Ireland, but for the whole of the Union. And quite honestly, the media has taken very little interest in this up until now. But when it gets to the Supreme Court, I think it will. But yes, you see, the reality is in the appeal court, we lost the case, but we lost it in the sense that we won that the Act of Union had been altered, but the court ruled that that was allowed by Parliament. And of course, I don't think I could meet a single member of Parliament who thought that by voting for the withdrawal agreement and the protocol that they were actually getting rid of a section of the Act of Union.
Do you think that Boris Johnson thought he was amending the Act of Union when he agreed to the protocol?
No, I really don't think that the Prime Minister thought about it like that at all. I mean, let's remember that they were under great pressure to get Brexit done, and I understand that. And I don't think they realised, but also I think they thought that within the protocol there was enough room for flexibility, for manoeuvre, for the European Union to accept that this wasn't going to be permanent. There are bits that actually talk about temporary arrangements. And of course what we saw, as you said earlier there, that the European Union used it very much as a way of beating not just the United Kingdom in terms of why because they'd left, but also supporting the Irish Republic in where it would like to see, which is obviously a united Ireland, but getting to that stage, you have an economic united Ireland, and that's what's coming about now every day, literally, as more and more things, more and more businesses decide not to trade with Northern Ireland. So I don't think the Prime Minister, but to be fair, I like to be fair to the Prime Minister now and again, and I do think he has genuinely recognised now. He has said it before, but I think he realises that he's basically had enough, that something has to happen. The European Union have had every opportunity to negotiate, to listen to and they haven't listened. So we have to take the action, and the government's going to have to legislate to get rid of Section 7A of the European Withdrawal Act 2018, which is the bit that actually says Northern Ireland stays within European Union laws rather than the United Kingdom. It is a nonsense, and it's absolutely outrageous, really. And I think more people are beginning to realise that. Perhaps people didn't really realise the repercussions, and I think they are beginning to now in the rest of the United Kingdom.
Well, why doesn't the government just do that? You know the old Stalin line about how many divisions has the Pope. How many divisions has the European Union bureaucracy in Brussels? Why doesn't he just get on and do it? Because every day is more damaging.
And yes, and every day it's costing more to Northern Ireland business. But yes, I mean, if this had happened a year ago, things would have been very, very different. I mean, there's always been an excuse, hasn't there? There was COVID, then there was the COP environmental conference that we couldn't upset people. Now there's Ukraine. And I've made it very, very clear that precisely this is the time when we're sticking up for the constitutional independence of an independent country, Ukraine. The European Union should be saying, well, of course we want to make sure that part of the United Kingdom is an independent country, and that includes Northern Ireland. But I don't want to see the Prime Minister announcing something in the Queen's speech, which is possible that he will, if they don't mean it. We've been walked up to the top of the hill too many times over the last year or so and walked back down again, and that is not going to be acceptable and is leading to all sorts of instability in Northern Ireland.
Well, you make a very good point with Ukraine there, Kate, because basically the Russians, if you do it the old-fashioned way by rolling tanks across the border, everyone gets steamed at you and everyone gets mad at you. But if you just use the bureaucracy and regulation to annex a neighbouring state, then apparently the European Union is fine with it. Thank you very much, Kate. It's always great to see you, and you're one of the few people who speaks up about this. Come on, Boris, let's get this done. We'll have one quick stump here before we go. Charlie tweets Anne Elizabeth Mute one day, Eva Vladingerbrook the next. Now Natalie Winters. Might one hazard a guess that Stein's favourite film is Gentlemen Prefer Blondes? No, actually. I like brunettes, and I got nothing against brunettes and redheads. And actually, I once saw the great Shirley Jones. She was, I think, making a sequel to the Poseidon Adventure, and she had dyed her hair grey. And Shirley Jones with grey hair. She's the mum from the Partridge Family, if you're 112 years old. Okay, enough of that. Grey-haired women, blondes, brunettes, redheads. I love them all. Dan Wootton's here to titillate your Tuesday like nobody's business. Stay safe, stay free.
Hello again. Clearing skies overnight will lead to a touch of frost in some places, but after that chilly start, actually Wednesday's looking mostly dry and bright once again because high pressure is here and it's here to stay for some time. It's building in from the north. Now that means because winds rotate around high pressure in a clockwise direction, we're seeing an easterly airflow, but actually the isobars are opening out at the same time, so those winds are falling lighter and we're going to see the cloud mostly fade away overnight. Still some patches remaining, drifting south across the Midlands, East Anglia in the southeast, some across western Scotland. But where we see those clear spells,